without further ado, let me introduce you to the moderator for the evening, the gorgeous Deepti Ahuja from HT Smartcast. With a never-ending curiosity about everything in life, Deepti has dabbled in everything from being a dancer to a children's author to a filmmaker to a podcast producer. She hosts and produces Ye Podcast Vodcast Kya Hai for HT Smartcast, wherein she helps out podcast enthusiasts looking to enter the Indian podcast industry. With her experience, I'm sure you guys will have a great evening. Over to you, Deepti. Let the session roll.
Thanks, Veda, for such a enthusiastic introduction, and I hope that we can keep that enthusiasm going. Also, if a Punjabi auntie comes out, in my personality there is one. I hope you enjoy that as well. Uh, just to introduce all of our all of our guests today, and then we can also then start off with the industry and all of the other things. So let's start with the lovely May Thomas. She is a presenter, podcaster, journalist, writer, voiceover artist, and she's had over a decade of experience in radio industry in UK and in India. She's been listed in GQ's 50 most influential young Indians. May that is something that I didn't know about you at all. And she is the founder of Made in India, which provides an end-to-end solution to create audio shows. Then next we have Amit Doshi. He's a tech entrepreneur and a podcaster. He started, a lot of companies in technology, consumer internet space. He's the founder and CEO of IVM. Anyone, who started off podcasting, anyone who knows of podcasting knows of IVM. He is currently the head of IVM Podcasts at Pratilipi, and more on that later. I have a lot of questions regarding that, Amit. Then we have Nikhil Kapoor. He is the head of business development and operations at Hubhopper. Hubhopper happens to be one of India's leading podcast platforms for over 5 years now. He has over a decade of experience in managing and marketing podcasts in India. And just to give a small introduction to the company because of which I am here on this panel, I work at HT Smartcast, and at HT Smartcast, we produced about 185 plus podcasts in 5 plus languages in 20 genres, all in a matter of 2 years. And the reason we've been able to do that is because our podcasts are present on 20 plus partner platforms, which have garnered us more than 65 million listens, again, all in 2 years. So welcome everybody again. You're in safe hands, and of course we have a lot of knowledge and fun to share with you. But just to set precedents for you, to address your first and foremost apprehension, most likely, why is podcasting worth my time? I'd like to ask everybody over here on the panel, how many people are actually listening to podcasts, and what is the future of elective listening? May, let's start with you.
I feel like this is a question that I have been asked 4 million times.
I know.
It's like, but at least it's come here, because before it was, what is a podcast? At least now, like, people are like, why should I listen to podcast? I would say that it is, I mean, honestly, at a time right now, I think there is some level of sort of like screen fatigue, okay, and to some extent I think listening, and it's been like, I myself, like an ex-radio person, I think audio has always been like a great medium for storytelling. I also think it's something where you can, while you're doing so much other stuff, because our lives are just like work from home, I feel like my podcast is like my little sort of solace and my hub. Yes. And it allows you to, while you're cooking, while you're, doing your morning ablutions or whatever that may be, that you have a chance to actually absorb information, right? Like, I don't have time to read stuff. I barely get time to binge anything on Netflix. So at least when I'm listening to stuff, I still am absorbing information, or I'm being entertained or whatever it is, while I'm doing 400 million other things. So I think that's kind of why it's worth it. a little bit, at least for me. I can talk only from personal experience. Yeah.
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense. Amit, I'm sure that if May has been asked this question like a million times, you must have been asked this question a gazillion times. So please, once again, you're on mute.
Wow, talk about screwing up a live panel. Sorry about that. Yeah, no. So when we're talking about like pure listener numbers, right? How many people in India are listening numbers? There are a lot of numbers out there, right? Some of them make sense. Some of them feel outlandish on the positive or the negative side. And I really don't think that we have a real sense of what that number is at this point in time. I think that we know that it's in the tens of millions, but where in the tens of millions is it, right? Is it 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, or as per that famous report, 57, right? I mean, like, where is this number, right? We don't know. I think that having said that, it's a rapidly growing number. It's a number that we're seeing more and more, like we're getting more and more data out of who are these people, right? And it's it's not an insubstantial audience, even if this is the number at this point in time, right? We're now at the point where it is a substantial audience. And again, I think that the folks on this panel, right, we are all people in the RSS world, right? We live in like the open distribution areas and stuff like that, right? But when we start looking at what some of the other folks are doing, right, people who are in the closed world, who are more of the venture funded type folks. I mean, like all of us are like, doing what we do, but I mean, like the more venture funded type folks, they're doing a bunch of stuff which is in the, over there, when you see the kind of numbers that those guys are generating right now, right? They're not insubstantial. They're fairly substantial numbers in that sense as well, right? So it's been a really interesting learning curve in that sense to see like, where this evolution is, how it's going. It's like, for us also, one of the things that I think that we're seeing now is we look at podcasts a little more format neutrally than we used to, which is why we're doing a lot more stuff on YouTube of late. And I think that that is something that we were kind of initially a little against the idea of, right? I mean, like, I don't know if you remember, but once upon a time we had gone to a Facebook event and we were talking about this after the event, and we were like, no, we don't want to do video, we want to do audio.
Yeah,
but
so true.
But that's not really the case anymore right now. I mean, like, we think of this stuff as a little more medium agnostic. And do I listen to podcasts myself? Obsessively. I just found out there's a new David Spade and Dana Carvey podcast where they're telling stories from Saturday Night Live. I'm totally on board reading that.
Very cool, very cool. And Nikhil, over to you. I mean, considering you have a platform of your own and you can't just generally say, I'll do video and audio together. I mean, what, according to you, is the future of listening, elective listening?
So definitely, Deepti, we've seen a huge uptake in the last few years, right? And coming from a company which is based on, or rather present on the demand side as well as the supply side, right? So we've seen a huge uptake. Today we are, sitting at over 40 partners that we are distributing content to. Just to, give clarity to the folks who are present here, that Hubhopper is more of a piping mechanism, right? So we have our own hosting platform, and through that we distribute content to over 40 platforms. So definitely we have seen a huge uptake in the number of listeners. And coming to the creator side of things, since we are also present on the supply side, I think there's been a huge uptake over the last 2-3 years. When we started podcasting, I would say 4-5 years ago, there weren't, too many people talking about it. But today with, biggest of the content houses present in our country, right from, HT coming on board to a lot of other content houses, we have seen a lot of interest come in. And definitely there has been a huge uptake, and the future is bright. Yeah. We are definitely looking at much more, people opening up to consuming podcasts. And like May rightly said, you don't have to take out time to listen to podcast in your day, right? It kind of fits into your routine, whether you are, planning to listen to it early in the morning or while driving to work. I don't know how many people are driving to work these days, but yeah, so there are already used cases for which you don't have to take out time. So I think that is what is been working in the favor of podcast. And trust me, we are looking at a great 2022 and the years to come when we talk about podcasts.
I guess it's Sorry, Amit, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say workout, commute, chores. I still say that over and over again,
Yeah.
every day. Workout, commute, chores. Workout, commute, chores. Workout,
Everyone,
commute,
yeah.
chores.
Yeah, besides pandemic has, I mean, it's safe to say that pandemic has been a very, very, I mean, it's like a boon to podcasting, even even outside of India. It's not just in India. And speaking of outside of India, May, you have a rich history in international radio, and then, you began hosting and producing podcasts. This is for anyone who's a first-time podcaster over here, or, someone who's actually planning to get into podcasting now full-time. How are podcasts different from radio shows?
Oh my God. I think the biggest thing that I learned with the difference between podcasts and radio was time. I had time. The thing with like radio is you push up a fader and you are live on air and you have no time. With podcasting, it was like the world was your oyster, right? Like in terms of like the formats you could do and the stories you could tell and how you could tell. And there are also so many restrictions around particularly private commercial radio, right? The thing like with podcasting was that I was able to like put out like a strong political opinion. I am able to tell a story in a particular way. I'm able to say the things I want to say the way I want to say it. And I think like that was so like, it's genuinely liberating. Like you literally are like, wow, I could just do like and say the things I really want to say. And I think that freedom is amazing. And I think that's why, people look at audio as like, oh, it's only one sense and that's it. But in actuality, there's so much like more that you can do it. And I do think right now there is scope to do so much more. Like you can think of a podcast in India and it probably hasn't been done yet. So if you want to create like, a show for, queer Dalit folk, you could, because it doesn't exist. And if you want to create folk stories, like Naga folk stories, and that be a podcast, again, like it's the thing is like, especially in India, there is like so much opportunity. And I'm excited, which is why that same fervor, I think that like Amit, me and Nikhil come from, is that like the horizon is just huge, like because things have just not been done yet. And I think that's what's exciting about podcasting.
Yeah, I completely resonate. Also, for everyone over here, you can drop in your questions, you can drop in your comments, and we'll take it up, in the last couple of minutes, 20 minutes for you. We've reserved it for you, for everyone here to ask all the panelists all sorts of questions, right? Because there is no limit to the future of podcasting in India. Now, Amit, apart from being a self-acclaimed Amit Shah doppelganger.
Not self-proclaimed. Widely mentioned as. Not self-proclaimed at all.
But, you're the true pioneer of podcasting in India. Anyone who enters the space professionally or, in an amateur way, we've all heard of your name, right? Now, but, to begin with, how did you scout and manage talent for podcasting to begin with? Like, what advice would you give young podcasters or even production teams, like mine, when it comes to talent acquisition?
Subject matter expertise. Number one, number two, number three. Whoever you get to do a thing, right? Whoever you're getting to work on a podcast for you. See, one of the great things about podcasts, right? There are different types of podcasts, but I think the most, what we're talking about for the most part, right, are shows about things. In the case of May, Made in India, which is about music, or when she worked with Pooja's show, which is about food and chefs and those kinds of things. In our case, Advertising is Dead, Pesa Vesa, all of these things are about things, right? So the most important thing is that the host that you have knows their stuff inside out, because without that, it's all, see, this is like, this is something that I think that that I believe very thoroughly in this, right? Anybody can fake 10 minutes on a piece of content, right? You ask me to talk for 10 minutes on anything, I'll read up for something for 20 minutes and I can fake a 10-minute interview on that, right? But when you have to talk for an hour over and over, week after week, you can't fake that. You have to know your stuff, right? And the other thing is that the curve of improvement for a host is so quick, right? That when you do your first podcast compared to when you do your 10th podcast, it is such a huge difference. So one of the things we started doing a lot, right, is we just pilot a bunch of times, because that gives the host that is going to come on, it gives them some experience to do stuff, right? So just do 5, 6, 7 pilots, right? Even if they're not going to go anywhere, even if they're not going to do anything, it just gives a degree of confidence, a way to learn how to do this, right? So subject matter expertise plus allowing people time to kind of make their mistakes. And I think that's the formula for good nonfiction conversational stuff. Yeah.
We are 20 minutes into this conversation and I'm already feeling so validated. Now coming to something new, programmatic advertising is still very, very new in India. We've only just heard of it. We've not really properly adopted to it, which basically just means automatically placing ads in podcast episodes, just like you'd see, on YouTube. Now, considering FabX has now been launched, which is India's first programmatic SSP platform for podcasters, and advertisers alike, Hubhopper is the first distribution and hosting service company to partner with us on it. So, Nikhil, this question is to you. A standard marketplace, of course, requires standard metric for listenership. What are they currently? And this is, both from an advertiser's perspective and a podcaster's perspective or a content company's perspective. And what are the new, internationally recognized metrics you're planning to introduce on, say, your platform?
So, Deepthi, I guess programmatic advertisement is the way to go forward with there, right? And the big differentiator of programmatic is that the brands would be able to target their audience better, right? So from the brand perspective, I think the most important thing is the filters. So for example, if I'm a brand and I'm looking out to select an inventory, my core objective is to reach my target audience, right? So I would go choose in filters like your demographics, who's listening to the podcast, like your geographics, location where the podcast is being consumed, right? Then I'll go even further deeper, go into the devices, IP, the format of the podcast, how long the podcast has been, running for. So basically, when I have all these filters as a brand in place, then I'll get the confidence that, okay, I'll be able to reach the right target audience, right? And I think from the creator side, if we are looking to monetize through programmatic advertisement, it's very important to look at few factors, right? So brands will only go after podcasts who have been running for say X number of months, right? They want to go in with podcasters who've got good frequency of launching their episodes. They're regular with it, right? They have got serious amount of listenership, right? And most important here is the completion rate, that people, because in programmatic advertisement, you're not sort of just serving ads as a pre-roll right at the start of the episode, but there's an opportunity to serve a mid-roll ad as well as an end-roll ad, right? So for a brand who's sort of planning to go for podcast, they always take into account the completion rate, number of listens that you're getting in a month, and also the loyal listenership. That's the basic ratio between how many unique listeners are there and how many listens you're getting at the end of the month, right? And as I told you, programmatic advertisement is the main thing to go forward with. We as Hubhopper and HT Smartcast and AdsWith, since we've come together, our endeavor is to sort of keep adding more data points, providing those it all happened. So what I was saying was that our endeavor along with AdsWith and HT Smartcast is to kind of be able to add more data points so that we are able to add provide more filters to the brands, and more filters will only ensure that the brands are able to reach the right target audience, which in return will give them more value. So seeing more value, we are expecting more and more sort of brands to jump on this bandwagon, and at the end of the day, help podcasters monetize. Right. And I think that completes the circle that as a company Hubhopper wants to achieve.
Right. More on podcaster education later. May your podcasts have a very different quality to them. I mean, it's global with a desi vibe. To look, I couldn't look for a better word, honestly, for this. It has that global appeal with a desi vibe to it. What's the difference between an internationally produced podcast and a nationally produced podcast? And what can we as an industry learn from each kind, considering now we are looking at Paisa for our podcasts?
So I have to be really honest here and say the one thing that kind of like bottom, there's going to be a little bit of a pet peeve, is that I don't think that from India, we're incapable of doing like international standard of podcasting.
Yeah.
Like literally, it is ridiculous to say that, oh, if we're making, I mean, the big difference is that in India, you are telling, you know, it in languages that come from our country, the content might be around Indian references and Indian sort of like either socio-economic, you know, sort of situations or culture, whatever that may be. So the content is local, but that doesn't mean that the quality of what we're making is like subpar and not on the same level.
Right.
One of the things that I find a huge problem is that because like a piece of content is made in India, or if it's made like outside, is the difference in the time we're given to do it and the budgets. So it's always India. They can do it in 1 month, and they can also, the budget can be garbage. And my problem is, why like does everyone else get better budgets and more time to do stuff? People, you get teams of like 15, 20 people and like huge like budgets and 1 year to do like one documentary series, and they're expecting that in like the line that I hate the most is like, when is the deadline? Yesterday. I'm like, then pay me now yesterday. What is this? So it's very like, so my problem is that people assume that like if you're making, and it's not like I don't work with clients that are based in Dubai or based in the US and APAC region or whatever. All of them understand time and they understand budgets. It's only here that everyone thinks that it should be done quicker and more cheaply. And I'm like, if you want, it's not like we're incapable of doing this, but when you have to cut corners here and there, you have to figure some things out. Yeah. But I absolutely think that we are capable of making international quality stuff like and again, because of maybe exchange rates, the prices might be slightly lower, but that doesn't mean that like budgets and time should be cut. So that's my massive pet peeve. I'm so sorry for the small rant. I couldn't help myself.
No, honestly, we completely feel you. There is Rohini in the chat who's saying, we feel you, May. This is a meme.
This is like, these are conversations that like Amit and I have had so many times. It's so frustrating. It's unbelievable.
And you have that conversation, I'm joining you guys.
If I could add to that, right? I think that podcasts that are created out of India right now, right? Whether it's stuff that we're doing, whether it's stuff that May's doing, whether it's stuff that other people are doing, right? The folks at Idea Brew are creating first-rate stuff. Amit Verma's show is one of the more popular stuff. There's a lot of stuff out of India, which is absolutely zero compromise on quality, right? I'll say this though, right? There is one difference between what happens internationally and what happens here. Because the money is different, we are forced into a particular format, which is conversational, right? The idea of creating documentary style or what we consider constructed shows, those are so much more resource intensive that even given like, you know, listen, we all know that monetization sucks right now, right? But even given that monetization is awful right now, to get to a conversational show versus to get to a constructed show, we're talking about a difference of effort by a factor of 10 to 15. That's very hard to get to. But when we do get the opportunity to do that kind of stuff, I don't think that Indian content is any more is like deficient in any way whatsoever. There are some shows that we have done recently which come under the constructed format. We have a show called Ikka Dukka Economy. It's a Hindi show about economy education, right? And it's a constructed format which I think has come out really well. There are all of the shows that are being done by Suno India are mostly in a constructed format. Again, good quality content, right? So I mean, like this stuff is out there, it's happening. The stuff that Spotify is putting out, that Mantra is making for them, right? Fictional constructed, right? All of that stuff is really good too. So I mean, like I refuse to. I mean, like May, I'd stay on the same thing where I refuse to accept that our quality is any less than anybody else. We have different realities and we play in those realities. But having said that, I don't accept that that international quality is by definition better than us.
I absolutely agree with what you said, Amit, because I mean, in our inventory of so many podcasts, right? We've done like 185 and we're aiming to do 200 podcasts by the end of this financial year. And the thing is that each and every podcast is very different from the other, and they all serve different purposes. So if we can compromise on quality and cannot compromise on the content, and that's why it is working, we go ahead and do that as well. So yes, because of lack of resources, we do make choices, but we all make smart choices.
If I could add one more thing to this, right? No, most of us are making content in English language at this point in time. I know, Nikhil, you have stuff which is outside. We also have Hindi stuff, but most of it is English language.
Yes.
When a Indian consumer who's consuming content in English language has all the access to all the international content out there in the world, they're still making a choice to consume this content. You get no discount for being Indian. You have to come to the table. You have to bring the same quality up. So, I mean, like, English content's English content. Doesn't matter if it's American or Indian. No. Why are people listening to Indian content? Because they want to listen to it, not because it's Indian.
True, absolutely. Now coming to hosting services and actually empowering our podcasters to make do with whatever they have at hand right now, Nikhil. Hubhopper prides itself on offering its hosting services to podcasters, and so what kind of services or education do you really offer to these podcasters apart from the basics, like providing a dashboard, analytics, programmatic advertising? These are basics that you're covering, but what are the other things over and above that you're doing to let them know that this might be your budget, but there is so much more that you can actually do with it?
So, Deepti, as a company, Hubhopper has always been, out there with an endeavor of not just growing the Indian podcast community, but also creating awareness. And creating awareness among creators, we've done a bunch of activities, right from your workshops to, sort of running campaigns online, offline, just to educate them, right? There are a lot of myths when it comes to podcasting, right? People think it's so difficult to do it, which is not the truth, right? Our own platform, Hubhopper Studio, right? It just solves, it's a one-stop solution. It solves a podcaster's need end to end, whether we're looking at hosting, whether we're looking at recording, editing, launching, distributing, and even monetizing, right? So I think as a company, we have, not just worked on the technology and the technical stuff, giving them more tools that they can utilize to make their entire journey seamless, but we've always, been out there trying to, sort of head the Indian creator space, so as to say. And the reason why we, sort of launched the Hubhopper Studio platform was that we realized that, when there was an uptake on the demand side, a higher percentage of the podcasts were actually being created in the West, right? Those were being consumed in India. But again, there was a big dearth when it comes to the content which was more suitable for the Indian audience, right? So that is why we said that, no, we want to create this awareness. We want to tell people that, okay, if you're creating content in other formats, creating a podcast or launching your own podcast is not difficult at all. So why don't you kind of, experience this new format as well? And I think over the last 2 years, especially the pandemic, we have seen a huge uptake. We have seen over 50% increase in the number of creators on our platform, right? We can say that's because of the awareness that has been created, or because of, people had some time. Change in the routine obviously, provides all of us some time. So they have, taken that step forward and they have decided to launch their own podcast. So I think our journey has been such wherein we have, I would say it's just the start of the journey, but we have been, sort of able to get a lot of podcasters on board. And, again, sky is the limit. So every time we step out, our endeavor is always to, sort of create awareness and get people on board, right? Whether we are talking at hosting, or we are talking at analytics, or we are talking at distribution, we just keep adding, new tools, new distribution partners, detailed analytics, so that we are able to give a better experience to a podcaster, right? And as a creator, it's very important. So let me pick up an example of analytics, right? So as a creator, it is very important for any of us to understand, right, who is actually consuming our content, right? So started with the basic of the data points, and today we are able to delve deeper and give them the most sophisticated data points as well, right? So that you are able to know, okay, what length is working for you, what content is working for you. And coming to distribution, we distribute right across platforms which are heard in metros, tier 1s, tier 2s, and tier 3s, and smaller towns as well, right? So all of that information clubbed in together, provided by Hubhopper to the creator, really gives them a lot of understanding, and I think that helps them to go forward in their podcasting journey.
Makes sense. And I think there is always, I mean, there's a lack that I've seen in the past 2 years that I've worked professionally as a podcaster and a coach and a producer, is that data is not collated at one single place for India at least. And so we don't really know exactly what is going on where. We might all be intuitively on the same page, but we might not actually data-wise be on the same page. And Amit, that brings me to the next question. Your production company, IBM, it was recently acquired by a distribution company, Pratilipy. And this kind of an acquisition, I think it's the first of its kind in India. But do you think that this is also indicative of a trend in the future where distribution platforms and podcast production companies might end up combining forces, which also might end up giving us, a lot more data points to actually, base our probably plans on? And if yes, we'd also like to know what are the pros and cons of such kinds of collaborations?
That's a interesting and hard question to answer, right? I think that because the thing is that it's really tough to make generalizations of a specific incident in this case, right? And in this case, it was a meeting of the minds between the folks at Pratilipy and ourselves, just in terms of where we saw the ecosystems going, where we saw audio as a area of this, and what we thought we could really do in terms of how do we supercharge the space, right? That's something that we've been kind of really keen on, right? I'll throw out some real and kind of this is real stuff, right? Media sales is expensive to hire for, super expensive to hire for, right? Those guys know what they're doing. There aren't that many of them, and they are hard to get on board, right? It would have been impossible for me to hire that independently. So we have a team of 4 or 5 people now, right? And for me to bring these people on board independently, while I was there with having to pay these salaries for 6 months before you start seeing traction, that was almost it was a pipe dream, to be very honest with you, right? But at the same time, they've been on board. It's been a great year financially for us in that sense. I mean, great is relative, I guess. But having said that, I mean, still in the sense that, I mean, this month we'll do more revenue than we did in all of 2020-21, right? I mean, in this 1 month, and that's a function of getting people of certain calibers on board, right? So there is, and from a data perspective, right, at this point in time, we're moving ahead with what we're doing from a distribution perspective with Pratilipy, but we're still very much still in that old world podcasting distributed ecosystem, right? Where our content's on Apple and on Spotify and Ghana and Savan and Pocket Cast and Castbox and all the rest of these apps, and Hubhopper too, right? It's on all of these places, right? And that means that we can take advantage to the same degree of some of the stuff that Pratilipy is able to do, even in a competing product like Pratilipy FM, right? So within Pratilipy, there is IVM Podcast and there's Pratilipy FM. And Pratilipy FM is able to take a lot of learnings on distribution from what their literature product has done, what their comic book product has done, whereas we have to kind of feel our way through it, right? But at the same time, we think that there is a model, this kind of distribution model is also very valid. And Pratilipy has, the ambitions are deep. What they want to do is extensive. And so it was a good fit in that sense. So I don't know that this comparison kind of would work for other folks. I hope it does, because it's been great for us. I mean, we couldn't be happier where we're at. And I hope that other people see the same kind of thing for themselves. But I don't know that we can kind of that you can extrapolate out from this, saying that this is a way for people to kind of think about how their business is.
Figured. Also, it's, I think, too early to predict that.
Always is. No, because it's always too early, because it's always about what's next, right?
Sure, absolutely. Now, just, coming back to the present, say programmatic advertising takes some time to take off, which it most likely will. And after all, in US, it only began in 2019, which was such a, I was like, what? It just started in 2019 properly.
Okay.
I
don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true.
That is a metric that we got from IAB.
Spotify started in 2019, but I don't think that US started in 2019.
2017. Did I say 2019?
You did, and I think it's even older than that. It's even older than that, though.
No, 2017. I'm sorry, my bad.
Okay.
Yeah, but regardless, it still began much later than we thought it would, ideally. So the next best option to earn from podcasting is branded content, and mainly brands coming on podcasts, coming on episodes, talking about their story, their journey, all of that. Now, what does a comprehensive brand pitch actually look like? And what are some of the questions a brand also must ask to fully understand the offer at hand? I think it goes both ways. Sometimes we might end up giving the entire pitch, but the brand might not be able to understand exactly what is it, where they are getting stuck. So both ways. I mean, and any one of you could answer this question for me.
Sure. I mean, like I just had brand podcast meetings today and yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind, right? So it's a so basically this only works if you can come to some sort of meet of the minds, right? Because brands have the things that they want to accomplish. We have certain quality benchmarks we want to hit, right? We want to make sure that our content that people are listening to is interesting enough to kind of like, again, to use the word discount again, just because you're branded content, you don't get a discount. You have to pull an audience just like anybody else, right? Nobody is going to come for love of your brand. You have to pull an audience, right? And so that means that your content needs to be this. And one of the things that we're very keen on making sure is that we ensure that the people who work with us are set up for success, not set up for failure, right? And we've got some bad ideas from brands, right? And I'll tell you the number one idea that we get all the time, at which point in time, I'm like, before we start a meeting only, I'm like, we can't do this. CEO conversations with other achievers and entrepreneurs. This is the number one idea that I get from every single brand. But the truth of the matter is that CEOs are not good interviewers. They're used to being interviewed, not interviewing, right?
Yeah.
These don't work. They just don't work. But it is something that we get. It's something we, if there is somebody who's really good at it, we can do it, right? Like, so for example, we're doing a show with Bank of Baroda right now. It's being hosted by Akhil Handa, who is a digital VP over there. But he's not a CEO. He's a guy who can talk. He's a guy who's really engaging. In that context, maybe it makes sense. But in most of these cases, they say we want our CEO to have these conversations, but we don't get to meet the CEO until the recording is happening. So we can't gauge whether this is going to be good or bad or whatever, right? And so this is not a good idea, right? And so we try and tell them this is not a good idea. You're setting yourself up for failure, which means you will no longer invest in the podcasting ecosystem, which means this is just a short-term money grab for me. And it's not so much money also that is worth doing this money grab in the short term, right? So it's but again, if you can do the right thing.
Honesty.
No, but if you do the right thing, you do the right. So I'll give you the example of a couple of shows that we did, right? So we did a show for Kotak right now called Come Home to Kotak, hosted by Cyrus Brocha. It is essentially Cyrus telling people how to buy houses, right? And so it's funny, it's weird, it has like all these kinds of crazy ass Cyrus tangents in the middle of it, and it's come out really well. Brand is really happy, right? We did another show for Global Victoria. That's an Australian it's about come to Australia kind of this, right? It's worked out really well. What we did is we did a multi-host show for them. They wanted to have some conversations about why you should come to Australia for why content creation is great, why business is great, why education is great. So we got a bunch of different hosts who were able to talk to them about that specific thing to various people from Australia. And then we marketed that show in India. Objective achieved, got a good episode out of it. It's valid. Anybody listens to it. It's not like, what am I listening to, right? And that you can't have that. You need to make sure that if you make bad content for a brand, they're never going to come back to you. And that's just in a space which is as nascent as ours is, doing a money grab like that. And again, it's not that much money, right? So doing a money grab like that is just not a great idea.
Yeah, I like to sort of dip my toes in this because honestly, it's just crazy how much I agree with you, Amit. Because in a lot of these brand conversations, the thing is that like you're firstly having to sort of educate someone about the medium, right? And everything is a numbers game. And the thing is that what is actually really different around podcasting is that like you are also kind of like especially for like some of the shows that we're working on, it's a little bit about the community that are sort of around it. So like even like Made in India as a show, because like it's kind of like a musician show a little bit. And a lot of the people who've sort of like advertised on the show have mainly been either around the audio tech space or a music distribution platform, whatever that may be, they want to advertise to a particular audience. So in that sense, that like, those are the kind of brands that have approached us. But we've also in a space where we're working with brands to be able to create a podcast. So like one of the shows that we had done was that like Bumble had approached us to make a podcast and they didn't know what they wanted. So they're like, this is our goal, like go and, give us some ideas. And I gave them a bunch of ideas. They picked one and it's something that they really wanted to do. And we literally till date have not even like met the Bumble people. We made the whole podcast during the lockdown. It was crazy. But the thing is, a lot of like what we're doing is that the thing, and like just like Amit had like the one thing that I'm not going to do. For me, that one thing is that a lot of people are like, I've got all these videos. Can we just like convert them to audio and make a podcast? This conversion, the conversion of like written blog or conversion of video material, and can we just convert it into a podcast? Someone can read it out and we can do. Or the video, we'll just take the audio from the video and then we'll make a podcast. And I'm like, you're not using the medium for its actual advantage. Like even this conversation that we're having right now, sometimes people don't realize that like when you're doing something on video, like I might make a face or I might like do something or make some like weird hand action. Everyone starts laughing. You can't see that on audio.
Yeah.
So my whole thing is that like, I hate when like brands like come to us and want to like convert something into something else. I'm actually like, hey, you know what? The thing is like within the scheme of like, because a lot of the time besides just brands, we're talking to agencies, right? So when agencies are looking at this as a huge media plan, one of the things that like ends up happening with podcasting is I come from a space where like you're doing everything else. You're doing social media, you're doing YouTube videos, you're doing video series. Why not podcasting? So in this grand scheme of things, they suddenly realize that, oh, why aren't we doing podcasting? I mean, we're doing everything else, because everything is like multimedia, right? You're like doing the gamut of everything, PR, this, that. And podcast as a medium can still be like, you can still have a campaign that an agency is creating and a podcast can be one aspect of that. So it's still possible to be able to do some, video stuff in a social media campaign. And one thing about a podcast for a lot of like brands is that it ends up becoming a little bit of a, it's not just the show. It ends up becoming like a 3-month campaign for them. They get to put stuff out, that social media gets attached to it. And they have things to promote. They have fodder for their social media and fodder to market. So the thing is, I think one of the most important things is actually for brands to use the medium for its advantages, right? The whole thing is that you're going to be able to use a podcast to be able to reach a certain audience. It's not like you're taking like a set of flies and throwing it off the top of a building, right? Like you are like reaching a particular bunch of people, and the value is the community and the loyalty. So if you're going to, your advertising is going to rest on a podcast, it's because someone is actually paying attention. It's not like a bugging ad on YouTube that I'm going to skip any minute, right? Like that's the difference. And so I think
podcasting too, you don't skip it. You actually go ahead and listen to the entire show, entire episodes after episodes. And now for the lack of time, I'm sorry, May, I'm going to have to stop you.
I'm done.
Right
I'm
here.
my rant too.
And I hope that this also answers Soumya's question. Soumya had asked this question regarding monetized podcasts. At least now you know what not to do while pitching to brands. All right, last question, and then we'll take up all the audience questions here. And I want to start this with Nikhil. What are your favorite podcasts currently? The one that you produced, the one that maybe Hubhopper's produced, and I also want to know about the one that you haven't produced but are insanely in love with.
So I think I'm a guy who loves listening to horror, crime, thriller podcasts, right? So my best picks here would be obviously one from Hubhopper Original. That was the very first podcast that we produced, Paranormal Reality. And I think it's been almost 2 years that we have produced that, but till today we get good amount of engagement on that podcast, right? And I think Jay Alani, who was the creator there, from that podcast, he's gone on to make web series, launch 2 books. I think he's done a couple of other podcasts as well. So I think that's one of my favorite podcasts. Apart from that, we did one podcast. We actually produced a podcast for Ghana called Shire. and that was also a successful one. I really love listening to it. So we did season 1 as well as season 2 after season 1 was super successful. And then out of the other podcasts which we haven't produced, I really like listening to the Desi Crime podcast. I really love the simplicity through which they kind of, walk us through the cases and the insights and the details that those guys share. So I would say that I love listening to these 3 podcasts. And yeah, man, I'm a guy who just keeps exploring podcasts. Yeah. So what do you do when you go to office and drive back and you got 3 hours to do? So I keep checking out all the new podcasts. That's daily life for you guys. Yeah.
I thought I had it bad. 3 hours.
Yeah, like
Really
1.5 hour one
sucks, man.
side. Amit.
I thought I had it bad.
I think that's an advantage of working from home. So I get that 2-3 hours extra to myself. But yeah, that's how it is.
What about you, Amit? One that you love and one that you produce that you love?
So I like all the shows we do. I think we have 48 active shows right now, right? So I don't know that there's one single one that I would say that I like the most. I enjoy Cyrus, but that's mostly because I'm on it a lot. So it's fun to do. Besides that, we have there's a new show with Varun and Suchita Salwan from LBB. Varun Dugirala of Advertising is there, and Suchita Salwan from LBB, called Think Fast, which is kind of like a tech this. So I mean, that's fun. I guess for personal listenership though, I'm just thinking about it, and like, I'm kind of boring. I listen to economics and I listen to basketball, and that's pretty much it. Right. So I mean, like, it's Freakonomics, it's the Knowledge Project, it's the Ringer NBA show.
Economics right now.
But yeah,
You're just nods.
no, but that's I'm just looking at my subscription list right now, and it's all basketball and economics and IVM shows, which I'm testing out. So yeah.
I mean, it's so like similar to Amit. Like it's so hard not to like pimp out the show that you do already, which is like Made in India. But I'll at least talk about like the more recent shows that we've released. So the 2 shows that I'm absolutely like really excited about that I would love for people to listen to is that we're currently working on a show that we released last year with an NGO called Catalyst for Social Action. It's called Care of the State. And it was an incredible show that we worked on. We actually did it. Veda, who introduced you, was actually producing the show for us. Right. And she, the whole show is basically looking at like vulnerable and abandoned children in India and kind of understanding like the system in India and how it works and doesn't work, understanding foster care, childcare institutions, and adoption and things like that. And I personally learned so much. I realized how little I knew about the system in India and what happens to like these children. So it was honestly, a massive learning experience for me. And the other show that is kind of currently being released, because we finished releasing that in December last year. We're currently releasing is called Why This Now? And it's with an online publication that's based in Dubai. And the woman Akanksha Tangri, who hosts it, kind of is covering sort of non-mainstream topics. So what is it like being Black in India? Or is mommy brain a real thing? And is COVID going to cause India a mental health crisis? And so it's she's kind of covering topics that are not necessarily mainstream, and like that's what's kind of interesting for me. And so that show is currently in the process of releasing, and I think the next episodes I'm really excited about because of everything that's been happening with Bully Buy and Tech Fog and all that is about trolling and how it affects women. And so we've got like Nidhi Razdan, who's on the show, and Supriya Joshi and Apar Gupta from Internet Freedom. So like that episode's going to be really like exciting for people to listen to. So that's our shows and the show. And I also have like these mainstay shows that I also listen to all the time. But the other show that I would like really recommend is Indian Express's 3 Things, which I literally do listen to every day. And the other is a show that I kind of discovered last year called Stuff the British Stole, which is a really great show that's come out of Australia. And it's literally about stuff that the British stole during their reign, and all of these sort of little things are kind of in these sort of genteel institutions in, you know, in the UK. And it kind of traces the story of these objects and how significant they are from the place that they're from and how they got stolen. And so it's a really good show.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna just hop onto that one after this conversation.
I'm gonna hop onto the David Spade show that I already like noted.
Yeah, I know.
I just looked at that right now. The three first guests on that show: Chris Rock, Tina Fey, and damn it, who's the third one? I can't remember, but it's basically all three
I'm gonna
ridiculous
lose my
names.
mind.
I
Oh
know.
my god. Okay, great.
Yes. All right. Before we actually move on to the audience questions, I'd really like to ask Veda if I can just extend this to another 10 minutes or something. There are a lot of questions over here, and a lot of them are important. Is it okay if we can extend this 10 minutes more?
We maybe can extend it for another 5 minutes. It's 6:55 now.
We
Let's
got
wrap it up by
pause for
7:05.
We really chatted up a lot. Like we just went on.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Fine. Just quickly then, what is the difference between podcast RSS open source platform and closed venture platform, and how does the audience differ for both? Nikhil, you want to take this up?
So I think as a open, in an RSS format, it is basically out for the public to consume, right? The benefit there is that you can explore different markets, you can explore the new platforms that are being launched, right? And it doesn't like geographically limit you, right? Whereas in a closed economy or say a closed platform, what really happens is you are just dependent on that particular platform's audience, right? So at times when you are talking about, topics, where you feel that you've got a wider audience, I think it's always beneficial to go the RSS route. And through that, you'll be able to, reach a larger audience. And at the end of the day, if you're somebody driven by metrics, numbers, I think that's the way to go for you.
I would say one thing, and this is like, I don't know if Amit, you want to talk about this, but like, do you guys still use Adori?
We do.
They're really interesting because I've spoken to Karthik, and I don't know if you want to mention anything about that because they're
No,
great.
so I love what they do from the perspective of, so some of the challenges that we have with RSS, right, is the non-connection. I'm sorry, I hope this isn't too technical for the audience, right? But basically what happens with an RSS-based distribution is at the time of consumption, there's no connection between server and client, right? So basically the device which is consuming is not connected at the time of consumption. That means we don't get much information once the content is downloaded. What these guys are doing is they've created something where they've created these subsonic pins which exist within the content. And so what that does is when you're using an encoder on your own app and other apps which are quote unquote adorified, right? And so at this point, I think they just launched with iHeartRadio in the US besides us in India. So, and they're getting into more and more spaces. What we can do is we now get an idea of listenership behavior. Besides that, they allow us to replicate a ad unit that is common for Spotify, Saavn, and Ghana, and that really helps when we're talking to agencies, right? Which is the unit that is a audio piece with a image and a link on it. Right. So all of those folks offer that ad unit, which a lot of brands are looking for. So now we can offer that ad unit on our app as well. Right. And so it's just a really interesting kind of tech that these guys have put together. And I mean, like Nathan, who is one of the founders, he's like a deep scientist guy. Like he's like, you talk to him and you're like, dude, what are you talking about? Right. But he's basically patented all this stuff and they're really, really strong with that. So I mean, like we're really happy to go there to do this because while as much as I believe in the openness and the importance of the openness of RSS, and also why should we force a listener to download a specific app to listen to our content? Let's go where they are, right? As much as I believe that, the expectation for the ad buyer in the digital media space today is that you will be able to give them consumption data, which is more granular than what we can in just pure RSS today. Sorry, I hope that wasn't too in the weeds.
No, honestly,
No, I'm sorry if I asked Amit if I wanted, because I know, like, I've talked to Karthik from Adori, and it's every time I talk to them and I'm like, oh, what you guys are doing. And I know that you'd be able, because like the one thing that like Amit I know knows how to talk about way better than me is tech. So
yeah, and you wanted to talk about tech, so here we go. Okay. Quickly, what platform did you guys start using when you were just new in the podcasting industry? Which platform was it? May. One word answer.
Platform to listen to podcasts or distribute?
Listen or distribute. I think it goes both
That's
ways.
very
Not
different.
specified.
So I listen to podcasts on Overcast because for me it's Overcast.
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 Right.
And it's for me it's just a better listening sort of listener experience.
Awesome. Amit.
I started on Beyond Pod. I moved to Pocket Cast, and I'm with Pocket Cast for like over 5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another thing. Podcasting also gets you loyalty going. I mean, look at Amit. He's been on it for 5 years.
But so I have 10 of
Longer.
them on my phone.
8 or something.
No, I have 10 of them. No, so I have 10 different apps on my phone, right? But Pocket Cast is the one which has basically it's where my NBA subscriptions and my economics podcast subscriptions are. So my personal consumption happens through there.
Makes sense. Nikhil.
Hubhopper, yeah. Whether it is for Hubhopper,
If Nikhil said anything else, Nikhil says Spotify.
through and through Hubhopper.
Okay. Again, this I think is a personal choice question. It's asked by Swayambhu. He's asking, when you invite guests to your podcast show, do you script it? And does that scripting come off as too robotic?
We never script. If there's a conversational show, scripting detracts tremendously from the flow of the conversation. We believe in talking points, we believe in preparation, but we don't believe in scripting.
Lovely. Me?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for a lot of so I would say that and again, this very much depends on guests that we have on shows. Some might feel more comfortable seeing the questions in advance because they want to prepare. Maybe there's data that they want to find out about, so that at least the information that they're giving is richer. So I'm okay with that. I also think it depends on the show. So if it's just like a host guest kind of thing and it's more interview based, obviously the advantage here is that you can edit. I always say editing is your best friend. So in that sense, then yes, you can always cut down the answer and make it crisp and nice. But there are also I know that there are some guests, again, depending on the show, where we've done a more constructed show where we need something that's very soundbite from a particular person. So they want to script their answer because they're too afraid. So what we do is that we always sort of tell them, and it's usually if it's a very small soundbite. If it's a full-on interview, it's very different. But if it's a small soundbite, can I just clip this and record it and send it to you or something, then okay. But then I always say, if you're scripting something as a guest, then write it in the way that you would speak. So if you're writing it, when I script all my voiceovers, it sounds so natural. Even my stupid jokes and all that also scripted in there. Why not? So my thing is it makes it easier for me, and it still sounds conversational without having to edit all the
basically scripted the way you would speak it. So that makes a lot of sense.
So I think that's okay. But ideally, if you have a guest who already knows what they're talking about, or is eloquent enough, and I'm saying that not everyone is the most articulate. I just recently we had an interview with someone who had a very strong stammer, and it was crazy to edit. But now, if we send that interview to that guy, he probably thinks he's the most articulate guy in the world. Wow. But that's the power of post-production and editing.
I know, right? Nikhil.
Yeah, out of our experience, what we've seen is it's always good to discuss, if not the entire script, discuss the pointers. Yeah, because if there's no script and if provided the freedom, we've seen that the 20-minute or a 25-minute episode, the raw file goes up to 3 hours. Right. So just to ensure that we are not, sort of spending too much time on post-production, and we know, okay, the main points are covered in the manner they should be, we are in a favor of at least discussing the pointers beforehand and having some sort of a script in place, so that then, we are not missing out on important things, and then we are also restricted to the time that we, sort of decide. So
very good. Makes sense. Visibility versus listens as a metric of success is often where podcasters sometimes get confused. So basically, I think she's talking about impressions and listens. While we give listens as a success metric, by the end of the day, what you see on social media is what you get. And if it's not successful on social media, or a podcaster is not successful on social media, maybe they are not successful as a podcaster. Is the basic idea. My God, this is a long one. Any case studies or things that you can share about how you've dealt with this situation, maybe with advertisers or maybe with even podcasters for that matter? And would love advice from all three of you on how you worked with a podcaster to make them understand the marketing process of a podcast. Great question. Very long, Snigdha.
I disagree with the premise itself. I don't think that I don't think it's absolutely essential that podcasters be on social media in any real way. One of the things that we see, we put a lot of effort into social media, right? But we know that we're putting that effort in for long-term branding. We're not putting that effort into drive listens today because that doesn't happen, right? And I'll be blunt with you. Anybody who says that happens is lying. That does not happen. There is a difference between consumption of social media versus consumption of podcast. Your entire context is different when you're doing it. And so I don't think that the two necessarily are linked in any strong way. Having said that, I believe that social media is important and that is important from a branding perspective because when people are going to want to listen to your podcast, they're going to have to be aware of your podcast at some level. Right. And so the awareness part of it is important, right? But the idea that you're going to drive listenership from social media, I've been doing this for 7 years and I've seen zero evidence of that in my personal kind of this. I've seen zero evidence of that. If you look at international social media, right, for podcasting networks, podcasters do social media, podcasting networks don't.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Now the next question is there an ideal frequency for releasing podcast episodes, or should that be dependent upon the duration or the content of the podcast? I think, Nikhil, since you have a lot of data regarding different kinds of podcasts and the frequencies, maybe you want to go ahead and answer this question.
So basically, what we've noticed is that weekly episodes, or rather one episodes in every 2 weeks is what we suggest podcasters. And in terms of the length of the episodes, see there's the normal length, which is 10 to 15 minutes, right? Which is considered good for most of the genres. But if you're looking at typical genres such as your news, right? So news bites are usually shorter in length, right? So say 3 to 5 minutes, right? We've seen a very successful BBC podcast, which rolled out episodes which were as long as a minute, right? Just talking about the highlights of that day. So I think in terms of frequency, I would say either 1 episode a week or 2 episodes a month. And in terms of length of the episodes, I think 10 to 15 minutes is a sweet spot. And I think it's good. If looking at the consumption, the consumption percentage, and also, talking from the monetization point of view, right? So longer episodes, as I told you, that there's an opportunity to not just monetize using a pre-roll, but a mid-roll and an end-roll as well, right? So longer the episode, less are the chances of somebody, reaching the end and, maybe having a chance for a creator to serve another impression. So I think 10 to 15 minutes is what I suggest people.
Right. And this is just a generic number. It's also based on masses. It's not really based on, you do you, man, Anjani, right?
If I could add, right, I found from our data, right, the number one predictor of success for podcast is regularity, not length, not frequency, but regularity. If you have a date of release, make sure you hit that date of release every week, no matter what.
Absolutely. Yes. I think one of the things that bothers me so much is that people are like, we'll just put 4 episodes, and then everyone will come. And I'm like, no, you have to put out, sometimes I have to literally tell people that you need a minimum of these many episodes. You have to build an audience. You can't just assume you put out the first episode comes out and then everyone will just come.
So what is the minimum episode count that
it doesn't matter. We can do once a week. We can do once a day. We can do twice a week. We can do once a month. It doesn't matter.
I'm asking, what is the minimum number of episodes a podcast should have on it? What is the minimum number of episodes?
Oh, wow. That's a complicated question, at least in my opinion, right? Because it depends is exactly right. As long as it should be.
Yeah, honestly, I usually tell people at least minimum have a 2-month run. We usually say 3 months, which is at least decent.
13,
yeah. At least. At least 3 months is it's measurable. We've noticed that the moment you cut off at 2, it's we've realized with certain shows where you start seeing a peak and then suddenly you stop releasing. And then the moment that they've done at least 1 more month, they can still keep going. So I would say, and again, it also depends on what kind of show you're doing. You might just do there are literally podcasts that are just 6 episodes, and that was it. That was the whole show.
But there's
So,
a marketing function that comes in over there as well, right? When you're, so the amount of money you need to, sorry, it comes down to money, right? But the amount of money that you have to spend on marketing is inversely proportional to the length of the run of your show. So if you're doing a 6-episode run, right, of a show, you have to really pump that marketing up front, right? If you're doing a 52-week show, you have 52 different events that are going to occur over a year, where you can do organic marketing. You can spend a little bit here, you can spend a little bit there, and you're able to kind of grow. And like, so it's really like kind of, there's no right answer here, at least in my opinion, right? You really just got to kind of deal with the individual situation as that individual situation is. Sorry, May, I think I interrupted you when you were saying something.
No,
not at all.
I understand and agree. And I mean, makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is exactly what I tell my podcasters too, that you have to at least do a 3-month-long episode. I mean, a 3-month-long podcast. And that too, I'm calling it a season. I'm not going to call it a podcast just yet. Right. Last question, and it's about languages. Ritika says, how do you work your way through potential language issues when you're trying to reach a global audience, but want to include more local, non-English speaking voices?
Make a choice. I'm sorry, make a choice.
Yeah.
You can't go left and right at the same time. You have to decide where you're going. So honestly, this as well, right? As somebody who's looking at this space, I'm not so keen on English either as a form, because I really believe that English annoys people who don't speak Hindi, right? And also, you're annoying people who don't speak English. So what is the benefit here? The only benefit is that 15 to 20 million people who speak like this, who live in the major metros. So that's what you're restricting your audience down to.
Right.
So I believe that make a choice. What choice? There is an audience on all choices.
Yeah.
But make a choice.
Right.
I just literally had this conversation like about 2 hours ago, where I'm working on like the production of a podcast, and it's in English. And like one of the people in this meeting were like, maybe, but if we, we need to like to access this to like for more people and more marginalized communities and this and that. And we were literally like, so what language do you want it in? And I was like, the moment you say Hindi, you're alienating South India. The moment you say like Tamil, you're alienating a bunch of other people. So you have to pick one. So if it's in English, it's in English. If it's in Hindi, it's in Hindi. If it's in Kannada, if it's in Telugu, like whatever it may be, there's an audience. But India is like, there is no like this weird middle ground.
It's crazy, right? We have so many languages, and the language also keeps changing in terms of dialects.
So we started actually doing, translated versions, right? So we have a show called The Habit Coach, and we recently launched a Kannada version of that show, where we're taking like 15, 20 episodes of it, which are great, and doing it in Kannada. And if we get some traction over there, then we'll invest in putting more in, right? Similarly, one of the new shows that we're launching, there's a show called Ek Chuski Finance that should be out sometime in February. We're going to be launching it in six languages simultaneously, right? So it's going to come out in English, Hindi, Tamil, Kannada, Gujarati, and Malayalam.
Which again brings me back to Nikhil. What are the languages that you see, growing in 2020? What, we are in 22. I'm like 23, 21. What year are we in? 22.
So, Deepthi, I guess we're going to see, regional languages, sort of contribute majorly here. And in terms of increment, that's where I see the major uptake happening, right? Even if I talk today, 60% of the consumption that is happening on Hubhopper is your, I would say English and the regional stuff, right? And see, we, as I told you, we are a pipeline mechanism, right? And we rely on our partners. And, we've got partners, if I were to name some, we've got Daily Hunt, right? So Daily Hunt as a partner is big on vernacular content, right? So those partners are kind of, they testify to a fact that, okay, there's a large market when we look at regional content. And that is where we see the uptake happening. If I were to tell you the most languages which are consumed today, or the major languages consumed after English and Hindi, it has to be Kannada, followed by Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, and then Bengali. And like Amit said, we also had one of our very successful shows called Karma is a Witch. So that was, again, released in multiple languages. because it was so good that we thought of, okay, let's release in a couple of other languages as well, because again, we wanted to cater to that market. And trust me, being in India, there's no markets which is small. So you don't want to miss out on that opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, all of you. Of course, there are so many more questions. I'm just restricting myself. I'm like, nine. We are already 15 minutes above our time limit. We should ideally probably come on another platform and talk about more things to do with podcasting. This was a great session. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. Jade, just one thing. Where if people have more questions, where can they find you? Let's start with me.
So I'm on Twitter at maybe. That's MAEBE. You can also find me on any of my sort of podcasts. I'm made in India on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Lovely. Nikhil.
Again, you can reach out to us at Hubhopper, right? Any of the email IDs. But if you want to particularly reach out to me, it's nikhil@hubhopper.com. And I think social media handles, we're all available there. So yeah, would be happy answering more questions.
Awesome. Amit.
So probably email is best, amit@pratilipi.com. But if you want to reach out on social media, I don't use it that often, but Doshi Amit on Twitter.
Awesome. And if just in case you guys want to reach out to me with more questions and you haven't heard any of these ideas and you're lost in the session, you're doing something else, I'm on at Mind Your Podcast. That is MINDYOURPODCAST. That's like Mind Your Language or Zaban Sambhal Ke. And I'm present on all social media channels. Apart from that, you can always reach out to us at HT Smartcast, HTSMARTCAST. And just in case you want to reach out to Fab Talks for something, please go ahead. Fab Talks is going to come again next month with another session. Thank you so much for staying back. We have so many people who stayed back, even when we went overtime. Thank you so much for your love, support, and your year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yair. Thank you.
We're done. Should we